How's it, guys? So, after 3 years of me neglecting to show an assembly video of actually my very first DSG swap kit, which is the Honda two-wheel drive DSG adaptation kit assembly. I'm finally getting around to actually do it. Partially because of the written instructions that I've been giving out for 3 years. Guys are always contacting me about they don't understand the instructions. So this is basically just to explain the assembly. So first and foremost, you will have your O2E DQ250 gearbox, which is basically going to look like that. And you'll notice there's a thread there and there. There's no thread there. It's basically just a blanked hole. That's a blanked hole. You got this protrusion with a seal inside. So the idea is that what you first need to do is you need to mold this area completely flat. This area, that, and that. You need to mill it completely flat with reference to that bell housing. You got to get that completely flat. You got to do a decent job because there's actually an O-ring that's going to seal on top of that mold section. Then what you also got to do is you got to tap those two threads to about 25 millimeters deep with a 10 by 1.5 thread on both of them. Once you've done that, you should end up seeing okay, this was not done with precision in mind. It's just for illustration purposes, but yeah, you're gonna end up seeing something like that, completely flat there, and there. This 2 points are already factory mold to that level, but this you will mold flat, that you will mold flat, that you will mold flat. 10 by 1.5, 25 mil deep. Same there, and then that's your prep for your gearbox casing. You don't have to disassemble your gearbox to do this. If you fill up that hole with something decent and you mill it, you don't have to disassemble. But most of you guys in any case are doing upgrades to your boxes. For example, LSD upgrades and things like that. So it's probably a good idea at the same time to do your LSD when you actually do the milling of this casing. So that's basically all you need to do to the bell housing casing on your O2E DQ250 casing. Once you have that done, then we move on to basically the assembly. So for starters, sorry, I don't have the crank installed here right now. But it's a two-piece crank adapter. You got your OEM Honda PCD, which will use your OEM Honda bolts or IRPs, and that will fit onto your Honda crank. It will fit onto your Honda crank, and you can see there's enough clearance for your sockets to go on. Even if you use your IRPs, there's enough clearance there. So once you got that torque down to OEM specs, then basically you put the second adapter on top of that, line it up, and with the supplied bolts, some Loctite on the bolts, and you torque that down to 65 Newton meters, and that's your crank adapter sorted. After you have that torque down, you will notice that it comes with the spigot bearing as well. And for the front wheel drive purpose, we got the 6-hole configuration for the 6-hole flywheel. Dual mesh flywheel. This is an 8-hole flywheel, but principle is the same. The flywheel will drop on, and your flywheel will come with OEM bolts, which generally come with Loctite already on the bolts. Always recommend using a new, even if it's aftermarket, using a new dual mesh flywheel, because they always come with new bolts, and that will drop straight in there. That's your, and then that's basically your crank adapter sorted out. You can do the crank adapter. You can do the crank adapter at any stage of this assembly. It should not make any difference. Okay. So next we move on to the main adapter. Your OEM 14mm locating dowels. You need to make sure that those dowels don't protrude beyond the face of the block by more than 5mm. Because you will notice that the main adapter counter bores, they are exactly 5mm deep. So actually you want to go 4 to 4.5mm protrusion on your 14mm dowels maximum. And once your dowels are sorted, your face is cleaned, crank adapter sorted out, then we can actually move on to assembling the adapter. Before we do that, I just want to point out that so you will have a pre-installed seal, which will be your shaft seal that will pass through here, and the milling that you did on the DSG bell housing, this is actually the O-ring that's now going to seal against that milling, the milled portion of the bell housing. So just to give an idea of what it's going to entail. So then we drop the adapter on. See if I can find the locating part there. Okay. Just make 100% sure that the adapter sits flat on that block. If it's not sitting flat, it's because your dowel is standing too proud. That's very important. Okay. So the next thing that's quite critical is, because we only have a 16mm adapter plate, I needed to maximize our threads inside this plate. So we don't have an abundance of threaded portion or threaded material to actually bolt us down. So we've had to maximize each and every single bolt. We had to maximize the threads on there. So you will find that your adaptation kit will come with 2 packets of bolts. The one would be the Honda DSG side, and then your Honda engine side bolts. So what you want to do is you want to take your engine bolts, and you will see there's various different lengths. Some may only vary by 1 or 2 millimeters, okay? But what's important is that before you do your final assembly, take the bolts and actually turn them in. Turn them all in for example, in this state that the assembly is in now, turn these bolts in, tighten them, well, just nip them up and make 100% sure that none of those bolts actually protrude beyond this face at all. Make 100% sure of that. Turn the engine bolts in, make sure they don't protrude. Take the adapter off, and then do exactly the same thing on the bell housing as well. Okay. Do exactly the same thing on the bell housing as well. Turn all the bolts in with the supplied the DSG side bolt pack. Turn these bolts all in. It's very easy to figure out what bolts go. You will know exactly if you're going wrong. Obviously, when you find a bolt standing proud of the plate, you'll know you've got it wrong. So turn all the bolts in, make 100% sure they do not stand proud of the surface at all. Then next thing you need to do is you can then torque down these bolts from adapter to gearbox. You can torque them all down 100% because that's your first point of assembly. Torque all those bolts down and then take the whole gearbox with the adapter and then place that onto the engine block. And then because you've already tested the bolts from adapter to engine block, you will be confident that those bolts will then not protrude past the face of this adapter. So just for illustration purposes and for ease of illustration, I'm going to do it the other way around for illustration purposes. Okay. So please remember that you first have to tighten this down onto the DSG box, then take the adapter with the DSG box, plant it on here, and then tighten this after you have initially checked that none of those bolts protrude past the face. Very important. I had some guys saying, why is the box sitting skew? They just don't follow instructions. So, okay. So now you've got your mold. Obviously you've got your adapter, which would have been bolted on here. So I'm just doing this for illustration. I'm going to drop this on here now. So just to recap, the adapter would have been bolted to the gearbox. You would have first checked to make sure that the bolts going from engine to adapter doesn't protrude, and now you're assembling. There is one more thing that I just forgot to mention. Let me just go back. Just gonna go back one step. Sorry, I forgot something here. There's one step that I forgot. This one particular hole over here was originally a 12 by 1.25 bolt that used to go in from this side. That can no longer happen. So what you need to do is you need to drill a 10.5 millimeter hole down the center there, break through, okay, and then grind that area, because your hole's gonna pop through there, and then grind that area flat, and then your bolt's actually gonna go in from this side. And in doing that, you're actually going to salvage the original 12 by 1.25 thread there. In case you ever need to go back for any, let's say, stupid reason, back to a manual box, you can always then reuse that thread there. So you need to do this before testing your bolts. Sorry, let me just. Before testing all your bolts from standing proud of the face here, you need to be first drilling that out, grinding that flat, and figuring out which bolt goes in there and nothing stands proud. So that's actually the first thing you need to do. And then from there, we'll move on to the final assembly. Okay, so okay, so I think that was pretty straightforward. I can't see if there's anything that you didn't understand there. Obviously, for illustration, this is much easier for me to do. So now you've got your gearbox, adapter, engine block, crank, dual mass flywheel, all of that nicely assembled. Your box is assembled. Now we move to the mid shaft. Okay, so your mid shaft, it will come pre-assembled like this, with a seal nut and a lock nut. My shaft terminates on this end with exactly the same OEM Honda spline, and with a relief cut for your OEM C-clip. So you need to put your C-clip in there. Make sure the C-clip's either new or in really good condition, because they can jam. And then I've had a few calls, messages about the cup not fitting on. But it always comes down to using a C-clip that's not in good condition, because it doesn't want to expand once the cup pops on there. So use a new C-clip rather, and then you'll notice there's the seal in there to actually seal over more like a dust cover. It will pop on there. And this, I'll show you in a second, will actually terminate at the same point as the original Honda CV joint. So anyway, so we got our VW spline sitting there. We got our seal. See if I can get more light. Yeah. So we got our new seal, which is now going to seal across the seal nut. That's what that basically is for the seal nut there. And we got our mounting bracket, which is gonna mount to the original mounting holes, which is that one, and that one. The only thing that you need to do is those two bolts, you reuse your original shoulder bolts, and that one usually doesn't have a shoulder bolt. That's just a normal 10 by 1.25 bolt. So make sure, don't try and force a shoulder bolt in here, because it's not going to pass through this hole. Okay, so you got all that assembled, and then we push our shaft up. Push the shaft up into the box. Tighten down your 3 bolts. And I just want to mention that once you got it tightened down, this cup will actually push on, and the termination point here is exactly the same distance as the factory K block where the original CV used to terminate. So in other words, the distance from the bottom of this block here to there is the same distance as your OEM K series. So whatever side shafts used to work, if this block was in a factory car, that side shaft would then still work. But that doesn't mean it's gonna work, because sometimes you've got to move this engine over towards the right front to get the DSG to fit in which case that side shaft then becomes too long. But for all intents and purposes, we've made it so that it is the same distance to begin with. Right, so you got your shaft installed, you got your balls torqued down. Now we move on to the seal nut. So, sorry, I just skipped one step here. I'm gonna go one step back. I'm gonna take the shaft out again. Okay, so your the original flange that used to sit inside the DSG box, that flange had a spring, it had a spring cup, and then it had this brass cone which used to push up against the bearing collar. So those three and there was a little C-clip that used to sit in front of the brass collar as well. That you don't need to use anymore. Only these three items is what you're gonna use. So what you want to do is, before you push the shaft in, you want to push the spring onto the seal nut. You got to twist it really hard. It does fit on. I'm not going to try now. Twist it onto the seal nut. Put the collar on top. Put the cone on top, and then actually insert the whole shaft into the gearbox. Okay, just going to drop a bolt in here quickly. Okay, well, once you got that in, so now you got your spring sitting there on top, and then you want to basically then start turning the seal nut until you start feeling tension on the spring. You're probably going to feel it having tension more or less, I think it's about 6 millimeters away from that seal. You're going to probably find you're going to start feeling tension on the spring. Then you want to turn the seal nut, and while doing this, you're going to be compressing the spring. There is approximately, I think it's about 12 millimeters of compression on that spring. It's not critical, you don't have to be precise about it. But what you do want to make sure is that you are covering the seal with the friction surface of the seal nut. And obviously don't go beyond that point. Don't bottom out the spring as well. Don't compress it so much that it bottoms out. So once you're comfortable with that compression on the spring, don't forget, this is quite important. Now you've got to put some decent sealer around this threaded portion, as well as the face of that nut. Put some sealer on there, or you will have a leak. Get yourself a 45 millimeter C-spanner, or actually you need two. Grip the top one. This becomes a lock nut, which will lock the two together. Now, please don't forget about putting sealer on that surface there and on the thread as well. And yeah, so then you've got your seal nut locked down. You've got your shaft secured, and I can't think of anything else. Yeah, I think it's safe to say Bob's your uncle. That's the assembly. This particular assembly is for using the TQ250 box only. There's a possibility you can do the swap with the DQ500, but it does entail some extra variations on the shaft entry point, but that's for a different story. If you follow these instructions explicitly, there's no reason to contact me and ask me questions, as many guys do, based on the written instructions I used to give them. It's really straightforward. The main questions, the main problems that I found with guys contacting me with the written instructions was the box not lining up, things like that, because they just don't read instructions. Make sure, pre-assemble everything. Make sure the bolts, because we are so limited by the thread on this adapter, I've had to maximize the threads. So in so doing, we got your bolts of varying lengths, which just barely sit under the surface of this adapter, to be able to maximize the threaded areas. So that's the main thing. Just make sure, pre-assemble the adapter on the engine first, make sure the bolts don't protrude, and remember they come with washers, put the washers on. If your bolts are protruding, you've just got them swapped around, or you never put the washers on. Simple as that. That's the only thing that can go wrong. Nice view from the top here is that you can actually see the seal nut sitting inside the adapter there, inside the seal. That's a good view from there. And furthermore, that's it, guys. I'm sorry for the delay. This is like 3 years in the making. I don't know why I've never ever explained this on video, but that's basically the symbol of the front wheel drive DSG K-Series adaptation. Thanks for watching.